Okay guys, so this is our Cold War review session. So I want to go through all the questions that were on our Cold War test, just make sure that you can review it all, and hopefully you'll get this in time that you can listen to it a couple of times before you go to bed tonight. You can see it's almost Chinese New Year, so that's why I have all the lanterns. And fun fact, this year it is the year of the pig, so that's why I have like the pigs up too. So anyhow, let's talk about Cold War and look at those questions. So the very first question asked about the Iron Curtain. Who was the person that first came up with that quote? And that was Winston Churchill. Remember, he gives that speech in 1946. Now, if you remember, the Soviet Union blockaded West Berlin. So in order to try to gain control over that, they did a total blockade, cutting off all those sections of the city. So we talked about that and how we had to do the airlift over. But for them to try to gain control, they do the blockade. So don't pick like the part that says we had this massive airlift. That's what we did like in response to how they tried to take power. So you want to pick on that one, that they do the Berlin blockade. All right, now this was a question that was missed in Jeopardy today. It talked about MacArthur. What was the port city he chose for a counterattack? Now, if you remember at the start of the Korean War, when the North invades the South, they pushed our troops all the way down to Pusan. It looked pretty bleak and hopeless, but General MacArthur was able to get some of his troops together, get some of the UN troops. They come back behind them in Incheon, and they kind of just like sandwich in their troops, and they push everybody up to China. And that's when China gets involved. But anyhow, so that would definitely be on this one. Incheon is where he does the counterattack. Now there's a table that's listed next, and it has all the countries that are in NATO and all the countries that are in the Warsaw Pact. So it says, the question says, with whom did the Soviet Union form the Warsaw Pact? So all of his satellite nations is what he ends up choosing. So that's Eastern European nations. And Boone has just walked in. Oh man. Will you stay quiet so I can finish this? Yeah? Okay. So that would be Eastern European nations. Here's Boone, guys. Say hey. Can you say hi? Oh, he's waving. Okay. So Warsaw Pact, that would be Eastern European nations. Okay, now the next question asks about how do we help Middle Eastern nations when they're threatened with communism? So remember I told you a way to kind of remember it. Think like East starts with an E, and Eisenhower starts with an E. So if you think about those two, it'll kind of help you to remember both of them. So Eisenhower wants to fight communism just like Truman did, but he's going to use the Eisenhower Doctrine to really focus on the Middle East. I mean, any country who's wanting to fight, he'll help, but it's mostly the Middle East. All right, so this question talks about TV programs in the 1950s. So how does it make the father and the mother look? The father is the breadwinner, and the mother is the stay-at-home. She makes all the perfect meals, always looks perfect, that kind of idea. The dad always made more money. He was always the one that went and worked. And on these TV shows, the mom never did. Okay, this was the symbol of the rebellious youth culture, and it was rock and roll. Remember, Elvis Presley kind of comes out with that, does the thing with his hip that's really controversial. Okay, now after World War II, many Americans, yeah, do you want to take them? All right, I want to go with Dad. Okay, perfect, thanks. Okay, now after World War II, it says many Americans living in cities, those you see the population start to decline. It's because of white flight. Remember we had talked about that? We talked about white flight, about how a lot of these middle-class families are wanting to leave the cities because of African Americans during the Great Migration. They're moving to the city, so they want to move out. It's an awful thing, but that's what causes that population to shift. We can attribute it to that. Okay. Then there's another chart, and this one talks about college degrees conferred between 1944 and 1950. So that's post-war time, the 5 years after the war is over. So you can see, if you start looking at it, the number of college degrees go up and up and up. I mean, by the thousands, people are getting college degrees. So what caused that? Well, we know it's the GI Bill. that after the war was over, if you were a veteran, you could choose to get money to help you out. Truman felt like if you had fought in the war, that's the least that our country could do for you. So there's different things that you could do. You could have a cheap home loan to build a house. You can get your college paid for, or you can get unemployment for a whole year. So those are just 3 ways that they would help our veterans so that they're not homeless and have nobody to take care of them. Okay, on the next one, there is a picture. It is a picture of a woman here in the advertisement. She's in front of a fridge, and she just looks so happy that she's got this new like freezer in this fridge. So it says, how does this advertisement reflect how people were purchasing after the war? Well, people are buying these labor-saving devices. I didn't really put this in jeopardy, but I thought it was really easy. People are buying like things that you don't necessarily have to have. Like, you don't have to have a fridge. There are ways around that. You don't have to have a washing machine. You can hand wash your clothes. You don't have to have an electric iron. You can use just an old-fashioned one that you put up by a fire, and get hot. So you start to see, now that they've got this extra money, a lot of them are going to be putting it on these labor-saving devices. They don't necessarily need, but it's really cool to have because all your neighbors have them. Okay, now, another question talks about the Marshall Plan. Remember, the Marshall Plan was where we would help you economically. We would make sure you were economically strong so that you wouldn't be tempted to resort to communism. And if you remember in the exit slip that we did, it also is good for us because if you have money, then you can start to buy stuff from us. So it helps to like drum up our economy as well. Okay. In 1950, what event happened that caused the conflict on the Korean Peninsula? Well, the North invades the South. So don't get those mixed up. One of the questions says the South invaded the North, and that didn't happen. It's the North crosses the 38th parallel. That was their boundary. And when they do that, that's just like a sign of war. Then it asks, what happened September 2nd, 1949, causes sudden change in Soviet relations. It's when the Soviet Union sets off that atomic bomb. It's not the satellite. Like when they get the bomb in 1949, that's going to really change things between us. Now, the satellite does, but that's going to be after 1949. The atomic bomb is really what really starts to change our relationship, because now we're not the only ones with an atomic bomb. We can't threaten them anymore because they can threaten us back. Hey, another question asked about Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. What were they charged and executed specifically for? It's not just for being spies, for being Russian spies, but they were, well, at least Julius was taking atomic bomb information and sending it over to the Soviet Union. So he was giving them that information so that they could have that bomb. And we find out in 1950. The next thing talks about like with McCarthyism. Remember Joseph McCarthy, that senator from Wisconsin. He's got everybody like really scared. His own brand of anti-communism. So what led to his downfall? Like, why is he not still in power today? Well, number one, he's dead. But like, how did he lose that power? Well, it was because they started to put his hearings on TV. And when they did that, people started to see like, this guy has no evidence and he's a jerk. And he's being awful to like these innocent people, like these mamas and elderly people and people in the military. And it just, everyone like caught on to his lies when he put it on TV. Okay. Now the National Defense Education Act, we passed after the Soviets successfully successfully put Sputnik 1 up into space. And they get Laika up into space too. So when that happens, we start the National Defense Education Act. It allotted money to scientists because we want to train those scientists, get them to figure out how do we get something into space. That's going to eventually lead to NASA, to how we're training our astronauts. Okay, another question asked about American families. So here's another culture question. So think about with the advances that we had in medicine and how it helped families. You've got penicillin and the polio vaccine, which is helping children to live longer. They're not dying from simple diseases now because they have a cure for them and from infection. Another question about GI Bill. It says, which of the following contributed to a surge in post-war home construction? So remember, you can spend your GI Bill money a couple different ways. You could do it on school loans, like to get to your college free, or you can do it on a house loan. So on this one, it's loans to war veterans, which was under the GI Bill. So the choice doesn't actually say GI Bill. You can hear boom. It doesn't actually say GI Bill. It's just the loans to war veterans, which is under that. All right, now, who is the doctor who says that you need to nurture your children, and by nurturing your children, you need to spend lots of money on them? That was Dr. Benjamin Spock is the guy who comes up with that, which is totally dumb. Remember in the 1950s, there was a group of people who criticized American emphasis on conformity. Remember, everybody's the same. Like, everyone wants to live in the same type of Levitt house that looks exactly the same. They want their families to be the same. They want to have this perfect family. And so the beatniks are really kind of the group of people that are like, we hate conformity. We hate being like everybody else. We want to be different. Okay, there's a book that was written during this time too, The Other America. It's written by Michael Harrington. And this book, he talks about poverty. So you don't really hear about that in the 1950s because all you hear about is like how perfect everybody is and how perfect their life is and their family. But he says a fourth of Americans are living in poverty. And no one's ever talking about that. So he writes a book to try to bring awareness to that so that people will want to focus and help those that are in poverty. Okay. Now, this country was the one that we sent several $billions to aid the nationalists, but they squander all of it. And that was in China. So remember, during their civil war, during the Chinese Civil War where Mao Zedong's trying to take over, what does the United States do? We send billions of dollars to try to help them, but they fall to communism anyway because they just waste the money and it's not used right. Hey, what was the one place where the Cold War got hot? That is in Korea, because remember we have the Korean War, so it actually does lead to conflict, but technically it's not us in the Soviet Union, it's North Korea versus South Korea, even though we're like behind them and like using them as puppets. This program screened federal employees for communist ties. So that is the Loyalty Review Program. Remember, if you wanted to apply for a federal job, you had to go through the Loyalty Review Program they could ask you questions on like if you knew any communists, if you're pro-communist, those kind of things. Okay. This group of people were actors and entertainers. They end up getting blacklisted because they have these like communist ties. So you would want to pick on that one. It's the Hollywood 10. So a result of the Hollywood 10 trials, all these people get blacklisted. Even after their hearings, people aren't going to listen to them. Okay. What made people move to the suburbs? Like, how did all that growth become possible? It's because of the interstate highways. People can now drive to their work even further than what they had been doing before with the invention of the Model T. Now that they've got a highway, they could live like in a whole nother city somewhere. Not just like in the outskirts of town, but like in a whole nother city. And you can get there a whole lot faster because of the interstate. Another question, how was Khrushchev different from Stalin? Remember, Khrushchev said he wanted peaceful coexistence, which he said that, and then with the Polish and Hungarian uprisings, he like puts them down and kills a whole bunch of people. But he says he wants a peaceful coexistence with us. He is less cruel than Stalin. He's not murdering all of his people and those kind of things. But so he does want that peaceful coexistence, or so he says. So here's another kind of repeat question. It says, Americans consumers, what are they buying in the 1950s? They're buying like those labor-saving devices, like we talked about already, like the refrigerator, the washing machine, the electric iron. So people start moving to Levitt towns. They start commuting to work because of the rise of car culture. And remember, again, that's because of the interstate system. One question asked about what did President Truman make progress in that no other president had. Remember, he desegregated the military. He was the first president to ever do that. So that's a huge deal. Okay. Who is the general of the U.S. forces in Korea? Remember, he gets fired by President Truman. That is General Douglas MacArthur. He always has like a corn cob pipe in his mouth. But he disagreed on whether we should use atomic bomb in China or not. He wanted to bomb China. Truman said no. And so he ends up firing him for insubordination. So that's Douglas MacArthur. This is weaker countries that are under the control of the Soviet Union. They're called satellite nations. Not puppet states or puppet nations, but satellite nations. This is our foreign policy where we said that we would provide troops and aid if you're struggling against communism. That's the Truman Doctrine. Remember I said troop starts with a T, Truman Doctrine starts with a T, to help you remember that one. Eisenhower promoted this idea. It means that both countries have so many weapons and they're such awful weapons that if both sides were to actually use those weapons, everyone would be destroyed. Like, it would be totally gone. So it's mutually assured destruction. I always think of MAD to help me, like if you get really mad, but you can't write MAD, so you have to put mutually assured destruction. That's what that stands for. What was the name of the first satellite that the Soviets launched into space in 1957? That's Sputnik 1, because remember there's multiple ones, so you have to put the 1. Truman came up with this one to investigate subversive un-American activities. Well, that should give it away right there. So the House Un-American Activities Committee is his un-American activities right in the question. So you can also put the abbreviation HUAC. This is the government servant who is accused by Whittaker Chambers of being a spy. He ends up getting found guilty of perjury, jail time for 5 years. That's Alger Hiss, Hiss. This is negative, extreme, reckless charge of communism from 1950 to 1954, and that is McCarthyism. Don't get it mixed up on your spelling. A lot of people want to put where Douglas MacArthur is on this test, and they think McCarthyism. It's not McCarthyism, it's McCarthyism. MC, like that, McCarthyism. That's after Joseph McCarthy. These are the people that rebelled against conformity. They're like against the middle class. They later become the hippies. They're called the Beatniks. So it's Beatniks. And then Congress passed this act for 41,000 miles of highway connecting all the major cities. Actually, I think it's 42,000 miles. I think I have a typo on my test. But it is the Interstate Highway Act. Interstate Highway Act is the answer to that one. Okay, but I think that is it. Yeah, I think we want to roll the questions. 17 minutes. Not too bad. All right, so make sure you study all this. Bonus question is Laika. So make sure you know how to spell Laika. It'll be your bonus. All right, have a good night. Study. Do your best. And I'll see you tomorrow.